Like most groundbreaking initiatives, startups, and even movements, they all began in the college dorm room. Now, Living the Charge is no different. You may ask, what is Living the Charge? Simply put, Living the Charge is a global initiative that seeks to raise a specialized endowment worth $100,000, whose interest income proceeds will go into securing unpaid internships and volunteering opportunities for bright, brilliant, but financially underserved high school students. You may ask, who am I? I'm the founder of Living the Charge. My name is Socrates Okong'o. I'm a current sophomore in the Huntsman program of the University of Pennsylvania, pursuing a dual degree in international studies with a focus on France and Francophone Africa, because I speak French, which je parle français, and my second degree at Wharton School, which entails a concentration in finance and management. The goal of my education is to give me a set of tools and skills that will prepare me for global leadership, non-profit work, while engagement in matters about policy and civic education. Let me advance further back to Living the Charge. Now, as I mentioned, it's a global initiative when I raise $100,000 to fund internships and volunteering opportunities for bright, brilliant, and financially fragile high school students. But you may ask, how do you even raise $100,000? Now let me walk you through the mechanics and the motivation behind what we seek to do. But what's mostly important is the motivation, because with the right motivation, the mechanics they showcase themselves. Now, the motivation behind Living the Charge is a simple acknowledgement that talent is everywhere, but opportunity, not so much. There's so many bright, brilliant people across the world in financially fragile spaces that are desperately living on the margins, where they're just one stroke of luck away from changing their lives. So Living the Charge is an acknowledgement that no one is self-made, that even if you're successful where you are today, you're not successful because of your sheer effort. Sure, that made a difference, but you're successful particularly because someone somewhere invested in you, either directly or indirectly. Either they actually met you at your point of need, or they created spaces and places and environments that facilitated your success. And if that is true, then there's a moral mandate, a moral calling, a moral obligation to pay it forward, because others, those who came before you, paid the price. Now that is exactly what Living the Charge is all about. It is a global initiative that seeks to raise a specialized endowment for $100,000. But above and beyond, it is a way of life. It is a way of thinking about the world. It is an ethos. It is a living, breathing spirit that transcends race, culture, geography, country, you name it. Because across time and space, we all acknowledge that from those too much has been given, much will be required. In African traditional society, we call it Ubuntu. I exist because we exist. I am because we are. It follows that across various texts, in the Bhagavad Gita, in the Quran, in the Bible. Even in Stoicism, it's all there, that from those whom much has been given, much will be required. And so Living the Charge is an acknowledgement, first things first, that others paid the price, therefore we must pay it forward. But most importantly, it doesn't end there. It goes a step further and appreciates the fact that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. And if we are beneficiaries of opportunity, therefore, in retrospect, we ought to enlarge the window of opportunity so the kids who live on the margins can penetrate through and have a shot at life. That's what Living the Charge seeks to achieve. Now, let me delve into the mechanics. How do you actually do it? We want to raise a specialist endowment worth $100,000. You either get 1,000 people to give you $100, or 100 people to give you $1,000, or you get one person to give you $100,000. Now, it sounds very simple, but it's much more complex than that. How do you actually do it? Now, talking about the mechanics and the how to do of raising $100,000, first things first, disclaimer, this is my first time raising such a significant sum of funds. Therefore, I'm learning on the job on how to effectively fundraise. But most importantly, I will acknowledge and appreciate that my life's experiences have prepared me for such a moment, either through the organizations I've worked for and worked with, the conversations I've had, the people that I've met. Everything has been culminating to this fine and pristine moment. We have 7 sources of funding for $90,000. The first source of funding is my own personal network, which is extensive and large by virtue of living on various continents. Born and raised in Kenya, I grew up there my entire life. Right now, I'm a student at the University of Pennsylvania. I've been touring a couple of states, meeting wonderful people, and forming beautiful bonds of friendship that will go a long way in taking the initiative, leading the charge, the next step forward. I spent my summer in France and had the unique opportunity of meeting with high net worth individuals and well-connected folks across Europe, particularly in Paris, where I was, we call them elbow brushing with folks at Le Cercle Interallié, which is one of the most elitist clubs in France. And it's such kind of spaces that I've been groomed and prepared to ascend to that have prepared me for such kind of initiatives like Leading the Charge. Now, these are some of the folks who lie in my personal network. Now, I shall tap into that, explain to them the initiatives and the motivations behind it, and hopefully they do hop on board. The second source of funding will now be the alumni network of Starry Boy Center. Now, Leading the Charge does not exist within a vacuum. It is a model that seeks to raise a specialized fund, but I'm not creating anything new. The model has already existed in a very unique institution called Starry Boy Center, where 70% of the students are on financial aid, they don't pay tuition, and 30% of the students pay. And those that pay, right, a third pays tuition. In the tuition of a third is the tuition of another kid. So a third pays tuition, then a third is sponsored by the third. And lastly, the last third is sustained by the process of an endowment that has been sustained since 1960, late 1960, heading to the early 1970s. And so it's the alumni network of that institution, Starry Boy Center, founded in 1959, that will bolster support in one or another in raising the $100,000. Third source of funding is mass appeal, crowdfunding as we call it, where through various initiatives that I shall elaborate later on in the video, we will be able to bolster support around Leading the Charge and mobilize enough traction and attention that people will be actually willing to contribute to such a noble cause, because I truly believe that Leading the Charge is a noble cause. The fourth source of funding will be grants and competitions. So grants and awards. There are various sustainable impact and investing competitions that finance and fund initiatives like Leading the Charge. I'm personally convinced that the model that we seek to elaborate is so compelling to the point that we stand a heightened chance in winning some of these top tier and premier competitions that will set us apart and enable us to sustain our operational activities even as we seek to raise the fund and grow it with time. Now, I'm pretty sure right now should be at this fifth and sixth source of funding. Now that will be now high net worth individuals and corporates who are very much interested in Leading the Charge and all that we seek to achieve. And now the last, which is now the seventh source of funding, will be friends of friends. Individuals who are so moved by the mission and what we seek to achieve, because everyone uniquely understands how critical internships have been to get them to where they are. Why not for an internship? I'm pretty sure that you wouldn't have your job right now, because everything started off, you're a trainee or an attaché, then you became an intern, then you got a full-time offer, and it is thanks to that full-time offer that you are able to ascend the corporate ladder and be where you are today, with that wonderful 45th floor view, drinking your espresso early in the morning, right, while you read the Financial Times. Now that reality is because someone paid the price for you, someone vouched for you, someone went the extra mile. Was it maybe that teacher who decided to maybe leave school a little bit later to show you how to do the math questions? Maybe it was the friend who decided that instead of taking you to the parties, he'll take you to remedial classes. Maybe it was that, your partner who decided to invest in you when no one believed in you. And so such kind of emotions and belief systems that Leading the Charge embodies resonates within all of us. And that is why I find Leading the Charge incredibly compelling. An example I can give is when I had thought about the entire initiative, and it was through dialogue with a very good friend of mine who's actually the co-founder of Living the Church. His name is Ricky Okong'o. I was in Atlanta at that time, and I'd gone there to see my former roommate, my freshman year roommate. His name is Bennett Bogdanchik, and I was with his family, incredible people. And when I had conversed with Ricky and we had the idea of living the charge and how I would execute it, I immediately went and had a conversation with now Bennett's mom. Her name is Trish Bogdanchik. And Trish was so moved by what we seek to achieve, and she was like, Socrates, you have the full institutional support of my school. So she's a principal at one of the premier institutions in Atlanta, high school institutions in Atlanta. And she was so compelled by the vision of living the charge because she's an educator rather. And educators truly understand how critical such experiences are in the holistic development of a learner. So it's such kind of friends of friends who will take living the charge to the next frontier. I've told you my motivations, that talent is everywhere, but opportunity is not. I've told the mechanics, how do we raise $100,000? But the next step, and for me the most critical, is why should you care? Why should you care about living the charge? I'll give you my own personal story, a couple of anecdotes here and there, and hopefully by then you will see the world as I see it, and I shall invite you into the belief of living the charge. Now, as I mentioned earlier on, Cerebral Center is a very interesting school where 70% of the students don't pay tuition. They come from the urban poor and the rural poor. Very low income households, I'll be very honest with you. Some of the students come from slums and the ghettos, similar to what we have the projects in the US. And I was a school captain when I was in school, and I was responsible at that time for, it was 1,173 students. And I used to have very candid conversations with some of them, if not most of them. And at moments of vulnerability, they will tell me about their past, about their history, about their present, about their life, and how Starry Center was indeed their lifeline. But why not for the school, they would not have been able to afford tuition or even have a shot at life, give or take. And when I say the model is indeed a lifesaver, because anywhere else in the world, it's always the other way around, where you have a couple of rich people, then maybe like 10% is kids from low-income backgrounds. Starry is the other way around, where 70% come from low-income backgrounds, 30% comes from fairly affluent, right? Now, my parents come from a fairly affluent background, or they are fairly affluent, and they paid tuition for me every single year. And the annual tuition cost was around $1,200. And in the $1,200, it was the tuition of another child. So let me explain this. The cost of attendance is around $600. But when my parents paid $1,200, they paid for me and another child, right? So there's Socrates and let's say Michael. So we have Socrates' parents pays for Socrates, but in Socrates' tuition, Michael can also be taken care of. And Michael, let's say, comes from the slums of Dandora or Kibra, right? One of the largest slums in Africa and consequently the world. Now, the third child is sustained through an endowment called the Griffin Memorial Endowment Trust. It's worth around $3 million, invested in very strategic funds like infrastructure bonds that yield a guaranteed return. And now it is from the proceeds of the endowment that the last child is sustained. But why should you care? First of all, that model is unique. And these kids who are bright, brilliant, but financially fragile, are desperately looking for opportunities for exposure, from great experience, and most importantly, through volunteering, it's an invitation for them to give back to society, for them to become contributors and not consumers. Because when well-wishers pay their tuition, they're consumers. But through volunteering their time, they become contributors and agents of progress and agents of positive action. And I saw this firsthand because I was involved in the voluntary service scheme project. And it was a unique opportunity for me to understand how the real world actually works, to bridge the gap between the classroom and the office place. But I will say this as my parting shot as to why you should care. That there is no greater investment. There is no greater investment and an investment in the life of a child. A child who lives on the margin between opportunity and missing out. And it is your decisive action that can expand this window for the child to pass through and, in essence, increasing their life chances. Now, that is what Living the Charge precisely seeks to achieve. Appreciating the fact that talent is everywhere, opportunity not so much. A follow-up question would be, what can we do about it? Now, Living the Charge is seeking to do something about it. To expand this opportunity by creating a fund that will be invested, the interest income proceeds will sustain the students to do unpaid internships and volunteering opportunities so they can give back to society, the same society that has been ever so generous to them. Parting shots. What happens? What next? We've raised $100,000. What do we actually seek to achieve? $100,000 invested in the Kenya infrastructure bonds that yield between 10 to 14% based on timing, and sometimes even yield 18% based on the central bank's interest rates. Now, the 10 to 14%, let's be very conservative, classic rules of accounting, 10%, right? $100,000 invested in infrastructure bonds that yield 10%, that's $10,000 every single year. $10,000 every single year, you might think that the cost for a child doing an internship is $5,000, which is classically the expense in the United States. But no, it's not. The cost per child to do a 3-week unpaid internship, catering for only food and transport and liability insurance because they're minors, is only $42 per child. $10,000 divided by 42. That will enable us to support between 250 kids if you're conservative and 350 kids if you're aggressive, working with the 14%. And sometimes it might be 18%. You do that for 10 years, it's at 2,500 kids or 3,500 kids that we shall be able to support within a decade. That is the nature of impact we're looking at. Because the cost to support a child doing an unpaid internship, caring for food and transport, is only $42. In the US, endowments yield 4%. Back in Kenya, endowments yield 10%. Government infrastructure bonds that are guaranteed return and they're low risk, more or less risk-free, yield 14%. So we have that multiplier effect working in our favor. The second thing is the power of the dollar, because we're fundraising in dollars and the impact is in Kenyan shillings. $10 feeds you for a day. $10 in Kenya feeds you for a week. That's the kind of multiplier effect that you're looking at. And lastly, the youth dividend. Africa and Kenya at large has a very bulging and growing population that is looking for opportunities for career mobility and exposure. Living the Charge is precisely seeking to address that main and critical pain point that we have faced and we have observed. Now, Living the Charge is not born out of the ether. It is an appreciation of the experiences that the founders, I the founder and my co-founders, have had, and how that ties back to their own global experiences. That's what Living the Charge is all about. An appreciation that talent is everywhere, opportunity is not. And we who are beneficiaries of the opportunity have a moral calling to pay it forward because others, those that came before us, paid the price. Now that's the mechanics behind how will we actually invest the $100,000. The goal is to scale the endowment to $1 million, but that's a bit more of a later down the line vision. My parting shots. Once we've raised the endowment, once we've structured it, we have a board of trustees, we have a board of management that will oversee the board of trustees and have some form of check and balances. Once we have the fund that is well established, what is the bigger picture? Now, once we have a critical mass of students looking for opportunities and a critical mass of employers willing to take in students for the volunteering opportunities, such kind of matchmaking can no longer be done on pen and paper. From then on, we'll need some form of matchmaking algorithm that will facilitate this matchmaking, so as to say. In the US, the algorithm is called Handshake, and does exactly that. It connects now university students with employers. Now we seek to achieve the same effect, but now particularly for high school students. So more or less the Handshake of Africa, that avails unpaid internships and volunteering opportunities for high school students across the continent so that they can get the exposure that truly makes a difference in their lives. And because it will be at no cost to the student, maybe at a fee to the employer, the proceeds will go into the endowment, and based on our ability to scale the endowment, we will support more students, attract more employers, support more students, grow the endowment, and becomes a chicken and egg scenario where it's growing at an exponential factor at all the three touch points, having an impact where it matters most. The bigger picture is scale the fund to $1 million. With $1 million, because of economies of scale, we'll be able to support 5,000 kids every single year. Is that for 10 years, that's 50,000 kids. That is a kind of impact that is simply unparalleled. Having sustainable impact. And the beauty of living the charity is that it moves from a charity case to a sustainable investment, where you invest once into the fund or into the trust, and we will not come again. It will be invested, and it's the proceeds that will not sustain the initiative. The principal will never be touched. And that's the classic principle of an endowment. The seed will not be touched. All that will be eaten is the fruits, the interest of the fruit. Now, this is an investment not just for today, but for tomorrow, and for the day after tomorrow, for the next 30 years, for legacy. And that is the beauty of a trust, of an endowment, that it will exist today, and I can promise you, it will exist tomorrow. What are our bottlenecks? Our bottlenecks are two. The first bottleneck is governance. The second bottleneck is trust. How do you foster trust, and how do you have systems of governance that radiates and permeates credibility above and beyond? Why do I say these are bottlenecks? It's because we're still very young and in the inception stages. But that is what I anticipate might be some of the key constraints that we'll face in the next coming months. To address the concern of trust, I thought of ways which we can build a lot of evidence around Living the Charge initiative. And some of those ways is through a documentary. We already filmed a documentary that highlights the entire initiative, Living the Charge, in expansive detail. Not only that, in the documentary, we featured the boys who were involved in Starehe Boys Center and Starehe Girls Center and partook in what we call the voluntary service scheme, which is now the pilot model of Living the Charge. That is how we're going to foster trust. And if that's not enough, we have testimonials of people like me who are beneficiaries of opportunities, of folks who have gone far above and beyond to pay it forward for us. The last piece is this: governance. We're in the process of thinking about how we're going to establish a strong board of trustees, both a board that will give us the skill sets, the guidance, and the direction, all while taking up fiduciary responsibilities that guarantees the trust and ensure that everything will be okay. We're up to standard with all the regulatory requirements for a classic NGO or trust, both here in Kenya and the United States as well. Now, those are the bottlenecks that I anticipate us facing. One is, how do you communicate trust? Two, how do you ensure that you have effective systems of governance? And that is exactly what we are thinking about at the moment. So rest assured. That is my message for you today. And that is exactly what Living the Charge seeks to achieve. It's a global initiative seeking to raise a specialist endowment worth $100,000 that will be invested in low-risk government bonds with high yield because of what the Kenyan market has to offer. And the interest income proceeds will go into securing unpaid internships for bright, brilliant, but financially fragile high school students in Kenya. Because we believe that that is where the most impact can be made in the life of a child. Making impact where it matters most. So Living the Charge is an invitation to pay it forward because others paid the price. It's that simple. And I am moved and I am imbued by the vision, and I believe in it fully because I am personally a testament of Living the Charge. My tuition here at the University of Pennsylvania is paid for by very generous donors. One of them is the Danraj family, They pay my tuition for the husband program. I don't pay anything. I'm on financial aid. And when I told them about Living the Charge initiative, what really excited them most was the fact that I acknowledge that they are paying the price for me. Therefore, it is my responsibility to pay it forward in the same vein. And their hope while paying my tuition was that sometime, someday down the line, I would pay it forward. But the fact that I'm seeking to do it today is an even greater motivation for people like you as well to be involved. That is living the charge. That's what we seek to achieve. And it's a journey of 1,000 steps or 1,000 miles that I'm inviting you to be a part of. Others paid the price, so we can pay it forward. Thank you.